Welcome to our next Wandering Walks of Wonder adventure. Today we're headed just a little bit north of Indianapolis for a tour of historic Fort Benjamin Harrison. Fort Benjamin Harrison was a United States Army post that was located in suburban Lawrence Township, Indiana, which is just a little northeast of Indianapolis. It was an Army post between 1906 and 1991. It is named for the 23rd United States President Benjamin Harrison. Our first stop on the tour that we see today is this building that now says Theater at the Fort. This theater was built in 1929. It showed movies and hosted band performances for soldiers and their families during its heyday. The fort and its theater were decommissioned in 1996. Until the end of 2014, the 38th Infantry Band of the Indiana National Guard used the building as a practice space. Theater at the fort is now home to Arts for Lawrence as of 2015. The fort was authorized by Congress in 1903 and construction began the following year. It officially opened in 1906 and initially served as a training ground for infantry regiments. The fort also held a prisoner of war camp during World War I. During World War II, Fort Benjamin Harrison saw its highest level of activity. It was the site of the largest reception center in the United States where millions of draftees were processed before being sent overseas. The fort also had a number of training schools, including a medical training center and a finance school. After World War II, Fort Benjamin Harrison continued to serve as a training base for the Army. It also became home to a number of administrative and support units. However, the fort began to decline in the 1970s and 1980s as the Army downsized. In 1991, Fort Benjamin Harrison was recommended for closure by the Base Realignment and Closure Commission. The fort officially closed on September 30th, 1996. Today, the fort is home to Fort Harrison State Park, as well as many of the buildings that we see here many of them are still original. This park features a variety of historic buildings and structures. It includes the fort's headquarters, barracks, and a hospital. The park is also home to a number of recreational facilities, including a golf course, a swimming pool, and a nature center. This is Spring Valley Cemetery. This cemetery is an old pioneer cemetery that predates the fort. It was originally named the Thomas Sylvie Cemetery. In 1903, the cemetery was included within the area the federal government acquired to construct Fort Benjamin Harrison. The Army tried unsuccessfully several times to have the cemetery condemned and relocated, but failed and decided to leave it private, and it's now an undisturbed cemetery. Many of the early Lawrence settlers are buried here, including Mr. Riddick, the farmer who sold his land to the government to build Fort Benjamin Harrison. In 1908, the Army constructed this water pump house. The original water pump house had 3 pump engines capable of pumping 1 million gallons of water per day from 5 deep wells. The water would then be pumped and stored in a 300,000 gallon storage tower. 5 additional wells added in World War II were added to increase the capacity to 2 million gallons per day. The original water tower is still on site and is now home to Midwest Studios, an interactive marketing, animation, and exhibition fabrication firm. As we head back and continue our walk, we'll pass by the old post hospital, which was later converted into the headquarters building as the post expanded during World War II, with a larger and more modern hospital was built on the other side of the base. Constructed in 1908, the Fort Harrison Inn was actually the original officers' club here on Fort Benjamin Harrison. This building here with the two large doors is the old fire station for the fort. It was constructed in 1908. It is one of the earlier buildings that are still left on the fort and is now a spa center called the Salt Cave. If you take a look, those large swing doors once housed horse-drawn fire wagons and served the entire fort. The cupola on top of the building served as a fire watch. There was a 24/7 spotter because all buildings were heated by wood burning and coal and were thus great fire hazards. As we continue our walk, we'll now come across several barracks and homes here on Fort Benjamin Harrison. This first barracks that we see here was originally the band barracks. It is where soldiers of the regimental band lived and practiced. This building allowed the band to be close to the practice and performance areas on the campus. Next door to the barracks, this building that we see, take a look at some of the bars on the window because this building once housed the Stockade or jailhouse here on the Army base. This building is the military police building and it is called a Stockade in the military. This is where soldiers at Fort Harrison who were convicted of crimes under military law would serve time. This next large building that we see in front of us was the Bachelor Officers' Headquarters. This building was the original officers' mess, club, and visiting bachelor office quarters, and adjacent to it was the original headquarters building. The bachelors' quarters was called the Bachelors' Club and could accommodate up to 10 bachelors. In 1917, the post commander, Colonel Root, abolished spooning at Fort Ben. His orders prohibited civilians from visiting candidates in the officers' training camp and soldiers of any unit on the post except on Saturday afternoons and Sunday unless an emergency existed. Unescorted women and young soldiers visiting and young girls visiting the fort were to be stopped by military police and questioned, and if they could not give a satisfactory account of themselves, they were to be sent off the post. Colonel Root also ordered that taxicab drivers and drivers of other vehicles could expect to have their vehicles searched for liquor, as he strictly enforced the laws regarding the bringing of liquor onto the post. To the north of us as we walk through is the 35-acre parade field, or what was called the Loop in those days when the fort was active. This was the center of fort activities for much of its history, from physical training in the mornings to military field exercises, as well as review ceremonies. In the evening, entertainment was provided by the regimental band in this gazebo that was built in the 1930s. The band played routinely on Friday evenings and the weekends during the early years of the fort. Ahead of us is one of the largest houses that we see here on the fort. In fact, it is the largest house on the fort because it was designed for the regimental commander and his family, along with the serving staff. This was a home for a full colonel who commanded the infantry regiment based here and served as the post commander. The house was not only a fixture of command for the base, but was also intended to host and entertain the civilian elite of Indianapolis, as well as dignitaries from Washington, D.C. As we walk along here, along Lawton Loop, we're going to see some of the original officers' homes. There are about 18 homes that are left remaining, and these homes varied in size based upon the rank of the person who lived in the home. Although this was a standard design for the Army homes throughout the United States at the time, these turn of the century homes were built out of locally available materials for a given post. In the case of Fort Benjamin Harrison, Indiana limestone and bricks largely fired at a foundry in Brazil, Indiana, were used in their construction. The materials were brought in by train, including raw lumber for framing, and deposited on the parade field, which served as a construction site, complete with a rail spur leading up to a small sawmill in the middle of the field. Rank determined the exterior design of the house. For example, the location and size of balconies on the front versus the sides or a wraparound porch indicated rank, as well as the number of oak-finished rooms the Army afforded its officers. The colonel's headquarters had 6 rooms furnished in oak, majors lived in homes with only 4 rooms of oak, and quarters for captains had 2 rooms of oak, and those for lieutenants only had 1. As mentioned earlier, this is a large 30 plus acre parade ground where many activities occurred throughout the day, from training to balls to various plans to just sports and other activities. Right now, we're taking a look at the remnants of an old parade ground reviewing stand. Ranking officers would position themselves here to review formations and passing units. This building ahead of us, which is still undergoing redevelopment and restoration, was the old Fort Post Exchange building. The exchange was where soldiers could purchase small items and snacks to make Army life just a little bit easier. There also was once a small 3-lane bowling alley in the basement of this building for recreation. In later years, it was used as a non-commissioned officers club. To our right is the old fort chapel, which was constructed sometime in the 1970s. After the fort was decommissioned, the chapel changed hands and was purchased from the Lawrence Township schools in 2022 to become the permanent home of Fortune Academy. Just in front of us, on this side here of 56th Street, is a Mexican restaurant called La Hacienda, but this used to be a train depot and stop on the Indianapolis interurban line, which would take troops stationed here at Fort Bend back and forth between Indianapolis and the fort. When train service was replaced by bus service, the depot became the fort's post office. This smaller building here on our left was the old bakery building. When it was built, it had the capacity of producing over 1,000 loaves of bread a day. Later, it was converted to the post library. And here on our right, we'll pass by the new barracks building. These were constructed in 1939, about 30 years after the original buildings on the fort were completed. These buildings were used to house soldiers training to be Army bakers in the building here on the right, as well as soldiers training to serve in the Army Chaplain Corps. During World War II, these buildings also served as barracks for the Army Women's Auxiliary Corps, or the WACs. I hope you've enjoyed our tour and wandering around Old Fort Benjamin Harrison here in Lawrence, Indiana. If you did, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, and we'll see you on our next Wandering Walks and Wonder. Take care now. Bye-bye.